All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Expo Information Webinar. My name is Ryan Wagner, and I'm the Wilderness Program Director here at Camp Manitowish YMCA. And tonight, I hope to pass along information and for our Expo level trips, either our Expo Canuck or Expo Western, or our Expo Mariner. And the reasons for these webinars, a couple different ones. One is to clarify any assumptions going into the expeditionary level, to relay the information that I know and that Manitowish knows, but you might not know if you are a first-time parent for the Expo level, and also to set expectations. And that's probably the biggest one that I like to do in order for those expectations of Manitowish to be out on the table for our participants and for our leaders, so that you know what you're signing up for if you in fact do want to partake in an Expo level trip. So tonight, hopefully I can cover this all in roughly 25-30 minutes. I'll try to talk a little bit quickly and leave room for questions afterwards. Those of you listening in post this date can take down questions and either email them to me or call me afterwards. But that's question and answer session will not be recorded. So we'll cover why we do Expo level trips. Like I said, we'll get into those expectations of our expos. We'll talk about the history and some of the schedules that they'll see next summer and the trip descriptions, and see a lot of awesome pictures of the trips. And I'll cover what we do in staffing, for staffing and staff training, and I'll touch on the cost a little bit, but you'll be able to see that more on the enrollment form. So why do we do Expo level trips? Well, we have a progression, and if you come up through the progression, you do the advanced level, which is approximately a month long, and the next progression for us is the 45-day trip. So naturally, this trip is out there for people entering their senior year or graduating, having just graduated from their senior year of high school. And what we do is we challenge individuals more and more in more remote and extremely harsh, sometimes, environments for an extended period of time, and in order to grow by our mission and our vision. And if you don't know our mission and our vision, it is to enhance the character and leadership development of each person who has a Manitowish experience, and challenge them to grow in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and in favor with one another, and to eventually develop confident, responsible, and enlightened leaders who will change the world. And a lot of buzzwords in there. However, it's totally true. And when they do these, when they partake in these Expo level trips, it's impossible not to grow. It's impossible not to learn an extreme amount of information and to challenge yourself. Our intentions are to make that challenge intentional, and hopefully that growth, transfer that growth back to the front country, where they're able to go back into their school or into their college or into their youth groups or whatever that is, and continue being a leader there. So we focus on that leadership progression. Hopefully some of these Expo level trips will, in fact, create future staff members for Manitowish, which is awesome. About 50 to 60% of our Expo participants come back and work on staff. And of course, sending people up into Alaska and up into northern Canada is a once in a lifetime experience, and you don't get that very many places. So that's what we're hoping to do as well. The expectations of an Expo level trip are very similar to previous trips. However, I want to focus on some in particular, and because we've had instances in the past where people show up and they don't necessarily know the expectations, or they're not aligning to the expectations that Manitowish sets for them. And we've had problems in the past with either people getting evac because they didn't meet expectations, or not having a good time because they were expecting one thing and they in fact got something else. So, of course, you've had to have had previous wilderness tripping experience, and you all have, so that's awesome. all meet that expectations. That expectation. So if you backpacked, you don't necessarily need to go on a backpacking expo. You can go on a canoeing or a kayaking expo, and vice versa. However, those basic wilderness tripping skills are the same, and this level trip still starts off fairly simple, where you're able to build upon the skills that you know, especially if you haven't been kayaking in a while or haven't been canoeing in a while or backpacking. You can still gain those skills while you're out there. You need to be in great physical and mental physical and mental state when you get here. The false pretense that people show up is, I'm going to get in great shape on this trip. That's a bad way to come into it, because I can tell you from personal experience, Alaska is unforgiving. Or if you show up out of shape, you will have a very, very tough time in those first couple of days and weeks. And in fact, you can hurt yourself by doing so. Same thing mentally. This isn't a place to escape and take a mental vacation from your life back at home or whatever it is. You need to come here prepared to immerse yourself on a very long trip remotely for with a small group of people for a long time, and you need to be mentally prepared for that. Understand that this trip will focus primarily on character and leadership development. So the leaders that are there, and there's two of them, they will consistently challenge you to better yourself in those capacities, as well as building physical and mental strength. Working on that character and leadership development is the core of this program. And understanding that this isn't necessarily a senior trip or vacation, but in fact is something that will challenge you day in and day out. Is something that catches people by surprise sometimes, because it's 45 days and it does get long. However, you can grow so much from these, and we want to make sure that the money that you spend, the time that you spend, you're getting something out of it. So we really focus on that. You'll have to know and understand the risks associated with traveling in the backcountry, and that is fairly easy to do. Most of those risks and that you'll experience, you've already experienced on advanced level. There are some there, it's more remote. There's more wildlife where you're going now than where you just were, so some of those risks are elevated, but you have to know and understand those and minimize those. Be willing and able to work in a small group for 45 days. You may have just done it for 30 days or 24 days or 25 days. But 45 days is a whole new whole new world, and you really can't hide from problems or situations that arise there. You have to meet them head on and solve them out there, because 45 days is a long time to go when you're not taking on those challenges and solving them in the field. So that's something you'll definitely have to work on and be aware of before you head out there. And then again, you'll be taking on leadership roles, but this trip will truly be your own. My expectations for our leaders are, you will hand over the reins to these participants within the first couple of weeks, and they will run the trip. You will obviously be there as leaders. The leaders will obviously be there to ensure the safety and those sorts of things are going well. But truly, these trips get handed over to the participants, and they need to take the reins and run with it. Whether they are the leader for a day or a leader for a group or co-leading, this trip is theirs. And then, of course, abide by the camp policies and procedures, which I'm sure they've done for a very long time. Now, if you've gotten your Expo invites in the mail, you'll notice that there is an Expo essay to do. This is something that I loved this year. That we just did it this past year, and I'm prepared to do it again this coming year. This is something where participants are asked to think about those expectations and think about the intent of why they want to come for an Expo level trip. And they'll type out an essay, and hopefully they're good. But what it really allows for us to do is, it allows for me and the outpost director to look at those and say, this person's here for this reason, this person's here for this reason. It kind of helps me align leaders for those trips, but it also allows those leaders to take a look at those and say, how can we tailor this trip to meet this individual's needs, or how can we tailor this progression and this part of the trip to meet this person's needs. And they also pull them out. They may pull them out midway through the trip and say, do you remember writing this letter? And they did it this past year, and it was pretty great results. The expectations of a leader. They will obviously have to be trained and be able to lifeguard and be able to administer first aid. They need to be in good physical and mental state, and they will work to develop that character and leadership development in each participant. They will obviously have to manage risks, be well versed in working with kids in a backcountry setting, and facilitate that transfer of leadership from one person, from them to the participants. Those are the main expectations of a leader. There are two leaders on these trips. It is co-led. That's something that catches participants off guard quite often. Um, they know it coming in, but it's still something weird about it when they get here, and we're working on that. We continue to work on that. But it turns into sometimes us versus them, leaders versus participants. It also turns into you're from Manitowish, you're not from Manitowish, because we have a lot of leaders, and I love bringing in leaders with outside experience, whether it be a Knowles leader, an Outward Bound leader, or a Camp Woodgewagan or a Camp Minojan leader. Bring them in here to bring that outside resource in and enable us to kind of broaden our horizons as a camp. So your participants or the participants may find that they have leaders that aren't from Manitowish. Now, typically I have one Manitowisher, one outside person, or both Manitowishers. Every once in a while, it may end up that both leaders are not from Manitowish. They will be trained to be Manitowish leaders, but of course, they don't know all the history and the inside jokes and things like that. So I just want to get that out there. That may happen. However, I try really, really hard to have at least one Manitowisher lead these trips. So the history of these trips, the Expo Western is fairly new. 2002, I believe, is the first time it went out, and it went up into the gates of the Arctic, where it still goes now. And it's a great trip. I did it in 2009 as a leader, so love that trip. The Expo Canuck has been going since the 70s. We've changed locations slightly. We used to go into Hudson Bay, and we don't do that anymore per the polar bear. And the Expo Mariner is our newest trip in 2008, and it took a little hiatus in 2009 and 10, but we brought it back for the last 3 years, and it's running strong. Our schedule, real quick, it's actually the same dates as this past year, but that just helped me in preparing this webinar. June 20th, they'll arrive at camp. On the 22nd and 23rd, the Expo Canucks will do some whitewater training on one of those 2 days, and all the other trips and the Expo Canucks are doing pack outs, food, gear, all the same stuff, shakedown hikes, paddles, all of that good stuff. And on June 25th, they'll all depart camp. We've been really good at being able to hire buses to take them to the airports. So the Expo Backpacking and Expo Mariners will head to the airport, most likely in the Twin Cities, and fly to the Twin Cities to Alaska. And our Expo Canuck will drive up to basically their fly-in location, which is Points North. So if they did the Canuck this past year, they just continue on the bus in Saskatchewan and fly up into Nunavut or very northern Saskatchewan or Manitoba and begin their trip there. August 9th and 10th, their trips will be coming off trail already. It'll go really, really fast. They'll return to camp, and there's a paddle-in / banquet. Similar to the advanced level, this is just the Expo level, and it actually runs the exact same. And August 14th, the participants will leave camp. Let me talk a little bit about each area, and I think I've got 4 slides per area. So the Expo Western Backpacking will head to the gates of the Arctic National Park and or the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So basically, they're on two sides of the Dalton Highway. Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is on the eastern side of the Dalton Highway, and Gates of the Arctic is on the western side. And they'll hike there for 45 days. It's you can see here high alpine Arctic tundra, looking at 3,000 to 7,000 feet in elevation. Um, Very open terrain where you're able to see for um, long distances ahead. Some of these valleys that you get into, you can see for 5, 6 days of hiking in front of you if you're going to be following that valley. These mountains are pretty broken down, so they're not like the Rockies. They're a lot older, I believe, than the Rockies. And you have a lot of scree fields, and like I said before, these long and wide river valleys that have been carved for years. You'll encounter grizzly bears, black bears, moose, wolf, grayling, trout, um, and uh, and a lot of, I'm trying to think of some of the other animals that you might encounter, but you also encounter great views. As far as traveling, you'll go back and forth, like I said, from here to Minneapolis Airport and then fly up to Fairbanks. You have 3 resupplies on this trip. Those resupplies, 2 will be most likely via air, so flown in on either a float plane on one of the lakes a um, or brought in on a plane that can land on a sandbar or a makeshift landing landing zone. And then one of those resupplies you'll have to pick up in Anaktuvuk Pass, which is a small Inuit village in Alaska that you can hike into or fly into. There is no road to it. So it's awesome little town there. And I didn't have any pictures here, but a lot of the little kids come and run over and say hi to the people that backpack in from the wilderness. It's pretty crazy, but it's awesome. You'll cover about 200 miles in the entirety of the trip, which is about 4 to 6 miles per day, which might not seem like a lot if you just did a Western, where you hiked maybe closer to 8 or 10 on some days. But the 4 to 6 miles will wear you out because there are no trails, and it's very, very rugged. So it's slow going, and a 6 mile day, like I said, will wipe you out. The Some of the bigger risks that we're looking at is river crossings, obviously bear and moose encounters, and falling and just being in a remote setting. So just be aware of those. Um, but for the most part, the risks are very similar to what they were on advanced level. For the Expo Canuck, um, we're looking at going up into northern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and then primarily up into Nunavut. And the area that you cover there is a couple different watersheds or rivers, the Kazan watershed, the Kunwak, possibly the Back River, depending on if I approve it or not, and possibly the Thalan River. So a bunch of rivers there. All of those kind of head up towards and end up at Baker Lake, and which is a town and a lake in northern Nunavut. This is open tundra above the tree line. You have huge, large open skies, like you can see here. High bluffs on some of the rivers. Excuse me. Very large, big whitewater, and you'll encounter grizzly bears, black bears, moose, wolf, musk oxen, northern pike, Arctic char, grayling, trout, possibly ice, and over the 45 days of paddling there, you'll be paddling pack boats, which I don't know if I had a picture of them, but those pack boats are basically, you can take them down, put them in a pack, put them on a plane, fly them back, fly them up there, or take them up on the bus, and it makes logistics for that really simple. Um, but they handle a little bit differently than a Rylex boat that you would have paddled on a Canuck. So just expect a little bit of a difference there. However, in whitewater, they kind of move with the whitewater, so they're actually way more stable in whitewater than a Ryolex boat, which is very nice too. The water's cold up there, um, and stability in whitewater is nice. You'll have one resupply. You'll cover about 15 to 20 miles a day for a total of about 600 miles. You'll have portaging around rapid sets. You might do a watershed crossing depending on your route, but you probably won't portage as much as you would have, let's say, on a Pio if you did a Pio or a Hoyo canoeing, or maybe even a Canuck. You'll take the bus, like I said, up to northern Saskatchewan, and you'll fly in from there via float plane, land on a lake, and begin your trip wherever your trip might begin. Cosborough Lake Lodge or the Selway are two big lakes that or Selwyn, sorry, two big lakes that we've started on in recent years. And once you get up to Baker Lake, you'll fly commercially back to Winnipeg, and Manitowish will pick you up in Winnipeg and take you from there. Clearly, the cold water is a risk up there, and there are bear, there are moose, there are musk oxen, and the whitewater is a risk that you might encounter up there. The Expo Mariner Sea Kayaking, you'll be in the coastal waters of the Inside Passage. Typically, as of late, you'll start in Juneau, where our boats are kept, and you'll circle back, do a huge loop around some of the great big islands up there, and come back into Juneau. And you won't really have to do much backtracking at all if we plan the route correctly and you're able to stick with the route. So you'll follow shoreline, either on the mainland or on some of the islands, and you can paddle up into rivers and glacier valleys there. It's big open water crossings, large mountain views. You're able to see glaciers, icebergs, killer whales, seals, humpback whales, brown bears, black bears, bald eagles, dolphins, salmon, trout, crab, you name it. This trip is really a wildlife scenic trip, and we have pictures this year of whales surfacing, a couple 15, 20 yards from some of our boats. And they're just magnificent pictures and videos of humpback whales. So awesome place. These trips, like I said before, will travel from here to Minneapolis, fly out and land in Juneau. Probably won't get a one-way or a nonstop flight, but you'll get to Juneau. Along the way, you're going to have 2 to 3 resupplies, and they will be mailed to various locations. And typically, you'll paddle into a town like Wrangell, or they paddled into Kake, Alaska, Kake, and they got a resupply there. You'll cover about 600 miles, and one of your biggest challenges will be dealing with tides and currents on the ocean, which is a new challenge for you, most likely, if you've never paddled on the ocean. And you'll be doing bigger crossings, 3 to 4, even 5, 6, 7 mile crossings. And that's one of your biggest risks, as well as some bear encounters, but you'll also have some ship traffic from the large cruises that go up and through the Inside Passage there. Staff training next year will be held June 5th through the 15th, with a 5-day training trip in there. Backpackers to the Porkies up in northern Michigan. Canoeists and we'll be going in here in the intermediate area in the St. Croix River, doing some whitewater training there, and our kayakers will go to the Apostle Islands. We focus on that character and leadership development in our staff training. We work on group dynamic stuff, we work on co-leader stuff, and we work on really handing over that leadership to our participants on our staff training, which is fast and furious, and it's over before it starts, it seems. And between training and when the participants arrive, there's only about 3 or 4 days for some personal time, as well as just final preparations for the trip. The leaders will also, last year we implemented bear spray training for our leaders, and our participants all carry bear spray on these trips. So we do a lot of that training as well. All of our leaders are certified wilderness first responder and CPR, as well as a lifeguarding or a wilderness water safety. Trip specific, our canoeists for our canuck are ACA whitewater trained, level 3, and our kayakers are ACA coastal kayaking level 3 or 4 trained. Essentially, they just have a lot of time on the water, and they make sure that their skills are such that they're competent, but they're also able to teach others and be able to be competent enough to help out in emergency situations. So who are those leaders? They're goofy guys, goofy gals, and they're pretty awesome. So most likely they've been here for a long time, or they've been doing wilderness trips for a long time. They're mentally and physically capable of doing these trips. They're based upon, I choose them based upon their judgment and their proven leadership throughout the years. And a lot of them, I ask them what they do. If they're from Manitowish or not, I ask them what they do outside of here. I want leaders that come in with a whole host of experience. So they're helping out in the classroom while they're going to school if they're still in college, or they're volunteering, or they're taking on a youth group outside of Camp Manitowish, and they're bettering themselves in the off season, if you will. And like I said before, new leaders to Manitowish are pretty common. So just want to highlight that. That took people by surprise this year. I'm not sure why. And hopefully people come in expecting to learn something new from people that haven't been going to Manitowish for the past 10 years. The cost of these trips is about $140 per day to run the actual trip, and about $215 per day to run the trip with covering some overhead. So these trips are expensive. There's an actual cost and an adjusted cost, which I'm sure all of you know the difference. But actual is what it takes to run the trip, and adjusted is what we supplement. You can tell by our application. The Expo Canuck is about $13,000, sorry, to run. The adjusted cost gets it down under $9,000. So we take about $4,000 and we supplement these trips by that. Of course, we have camperships and such available, but we really invest in our participants on these trips because we know that these create our best leaders, and they also create some of our staff, to be honest. So it's a great investment for us. It's a great investment for you. In my eyes, I wasn't able to do this when I was a participant, but these trips are definitely prized amongst those that have done them. And it was one of my best experiences as a staff member. And if you can afford it, it's definitely worth it. That being said, I'll finish with the nuts and bolts of the webinar. I'm going to end the recording. Again, if you have questions at home, you can take those down and call me or email me afterwards. For those of you that are on the line now, you can definitely use the box on your screen to ask questions, and I can field them at this time.